to today's webinar, Using Logic Models for Program Planning and Evaluation for Tribal Agencies. This is Kanako from GW Cancer Center, and we're very pleased to welcome our speaker, who we will introduce shortly. We would acknowledge the Centers for Disease Control Prevention for supporting this work. The webinar's learning objectives. Please complete the poll coming up on your screen now. We have a diverse tribal representation today, and we'd like to capture that as best as we can, so please take a moment to do that. So two main objectives is explain the importance of creating specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound or SMART objectives and logic modeling. Describe, develop logic models for programs implemented by your tribal agencies. Illustrate the application of logic models in planning and evaluation, and create resources for creating logic models. Before we dive in, please take notes of these housekeeping remarks. While everyone has been put on mute upon entry, please also individually mute your phones to ensure high audio quality when it comes time to the Q&A portion of the webinar. The webinar will be recorded and made publicly available, so many more people have access to the information presented after today. The link to today's slides will also be included in the email that will follow this webinar. We are Mr. Elton Noswood, Senior Program Analyst from the Capacity Building Division at the Office of Minority Health Resource Center, a nationwide service of the Office of Minority Health. Mr. Noswood is a member of the Navajo Nation and received a Bachelor of Arts degree in Sociology and American Indian Justice Studies from Arizona State University, attended the graduate degree program in American Indian Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles. Mr. Noswood, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Hanukkah. I'm very honored to be here on using logic models for program planning and evaluation for tribal agencies. But before I begin, I'd like to traditionally introduce myself. Yad Shaya Elton Noswood Shia, Tabahan Bashashin, Nakaida Shiche Tatnisani Ada Shinala. Hello, my name is Elton Noswood. I'm of the Near to the Water clan, born for the Edgewater clan. My maternal grandfather's clans of the Mexican people, and my paternal grandfather's clans of the Tango people, the Hawaiian Navajo. I taught at a young age to introduce myself in that way. I just wanted to go before we begin today's presentation. This presentation is going to give some background on how to use logic model in terms of program planning, but also can utilize in grant proposal writing, strategic planning, but hopefully this presentation will help to outline a systematic process in which we can all be able to use in the programs that we run or the resource fundings that we're looking for. So through this presentation, hopefully we'll be able to have some missions, but also have outcomes in the work that you're doing in your own tribal communities. We all do work in public health. We know that there are different ways of assisting in prevention programs and treatment programs, and one of those that we do it is through what is called an intervention. An intervention is an action taken to improve a given situation or context and considers the social ecological framework. The social ecological framework, and this is a diagram, is very resourceful to be able to use not only but in program planning while you're looking at the types of interventions or program planning that you're doing. Sometimes at an individual level, where you look at individually through your staff or management, and assess and be able to assess their knowledge, attitudes, and skills. The next look, so useful in looking at the interpersonal of your program, which may include the family, friends, or social network. It's important when you consider utilizing in this is the organizational framework. Look at your own organizations as well as social institutions, which can include, different areas, your tribal health department, your tribal government. So it's really important to know those processes as well. Next one is community. Community is about the relationships among organizations that are out there, which include churches, different community-based organizations as well, but really beginning to look at the community perspective. And the last one to be considered as well in the outline of this diagram is public policy. How does the programmatic work that you're doing affect public policy, not only on a national, state, and local level, but I also want to include the tribal level, since we're talking about tribal agencies, and how does that look in terms of the work that you're doing? It's really important to look at this framework and utilize this framework because it really helps in looking for health issues. It helps in terms of how programs are developed and how you can structure interventions to look at these different aspects. Just wanted to briefly go over what are called SMART objectives. I'd like to say there are no dumb objectives, but there should be SMART objectives. And most of us who have done planning, program development, or even grant writing kind of utilize these acronyms to help us in developing objectives in a system resourceful way to be able to remember while you're writing objectives, to make sure that they are specific goals, objectives to the populations that you're working with, measurable, and achievable. Very important aspects. So they are relevant, responsive, and realistic. And we really utilize the word realistic to see if the objectives are realistic in the work that you're doing. And the latter is time. So how long does these objectives will take? Very important to looking at time and being very specific about that, because that would really help out the program you're developing as well as with the objectives you're developing as well. So objectives. Objectives can be educational, they can be intermediate goals, can be behavioral objectives, as well as health-related objectives. These objectives should align with the outcomes and impacts of the logic model, but are more specific. So we want to make sure that you're using these different types of objectives, which can vary, but make sure that they also include this as well. Objectives. These are some examples of the different objectives that I mentioned in the previous slide. And these were all, and by objectives, you really want to be able to achieve your project or for your program. So an example of the educational objectives, with 85% of participants in tribal health programs will be able to at least 5 saturated fats by the 4th of the program. Now, the educational objective utilizes the SMART objective. It's specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's realistic, and there is a time-specific frame in there. Meaning they're looking at 85% of the participants would be able to do this within a 4-week program, and they'll be able to admit at least 5 foods, which is realistic, as being participants of this particular program. It's a great example of an educational objective. The next example is a behavioral objective. An example here is that 50% in the tribal health 50% of participants in the child program will reduce the daily dietary intake of saturated fat to less than 35% of the total caloric intake by the third month of the program. Again, this objective is based on the behavior of the participants. It uses the SMART objective in being able to write this objective in terms of 50% of the specific is measurable, and it's time specific within the third month of the program. Example is a health objective. 35% of participants in the health program will reduce blood cholesterol to below 20 milligrams per liter after 2 years of implementation. So this utilizes the SMART objective, measurable, that also is specific. It is achievable for some, but it's a longer time of 2 years in which this will take place. So these are some examples of aligning their objectives, whether it be educational, behavioral, or health, vary as well as you're developing your program. Background around objectives, we really want to go in now to look at the logic model and what a logic model will help and entail for your program. So there's a picture of your program. So we're looking at the overall program, putting into the organization and what you are doing and what you are trying to achieve. It identifies the strategy of the underlying your program. Understanding, especially the relationships between action and result, what your program is and is not about, forms a basis for evaluation. So the logic model, you can kind of see some similarities to what we talked about earlier in terms of SMART objectives. It just helps you to bring all those together and being able to get overall framework of what your program that you're developing. I'm a visual person, so everything that I read or I'm presenting doesn't make a lot of sense, but put it down in a visual like this slide has, very helpful to understand the process. Just an example of a logic model. You want to put together your program goal. What is your overall aim or intended impact for your program goal? I want to also utilize resources, which are dedicated to or consumed by the program, as well as list activities, which are the actions that the program takes to achieve desired outcomes. And then from those activities, what are some of the outputs that you get from those activities that you present? So making sure they're measurable products of the program's activities. Outcomes from the outputs is very important because we want to look at the benefits to clients, the community, the systems, organizations in which you're serving. And it's also important to remember, at least for the first two sections of this diagram, how are resources and activities be done, and looking at the outputs and outcomes, why, and so what are some questions you want to be able to ask yourself as you're developing your logic model. So the model has different components, as well as it does have additional components that can be added to it. It can be graphic, it can be full, it can be a flowchart, or it can be native. It really depends on how you're able to understand what you're proposing. I'm very visual, and I know a lot of Native people are very visual, so utilizing a graphic or a table or a flowchart might be more recommendable to be able to do. Doing it through a group process as well. I think as Native people as well, we process information in a group setting, whether it's through staff, community, clans. That's just the way, in which we process these different ways of planning. Include information about assumptions, often externalities, textual issues, or behavioral theories. For some of you, maybe applying for a grant or a proposal, whether it's working with mental health or whether it's working with interventions, it's a good idea to utilize some of these behavioral theories. And these acronyms here that we list that can be included or used are books such as the health belief model, social cause theory, as well as the trans-theoretical model, the stages of change. So acronyms are just examples of some of the behavioral theories that can all be utilized. Fundamentally, the logic model is a way to communicate what your program is about. Utilizing these different ways of planning, I think, are really important when you're looking at utilizing a logic model structure. Again, validation. This is just an example of a program that follow to explain the different components of a logic model. The program goal within the logic model is to improve the oral health of low-income Native children who receive primary care in a tribal health center. That's the overall goal, program goal. Some of the resources that may be needed in this probably a dental clinic coordinator, a tribal health director, staff dentist, staff pediatrician, medical providers, for supplies. Listed here are the resources component. Activities. So within this logic model example, some of these can include training. So you would want to develop a curriculum for 2-1 didactic trainings to medical providers, assessment. So as part of the training activity, you might want to do a one-on-one training to medical providers on oral health in general. Then also another activity would be outreach. So that outreach is to order dental supplies for packets, distribute the packet to the parents at the end of each visit. So that activity under outreach. Some of the acts can be associated with this program goal is training. And as part of the outputs, we need to measure how that's done. So having a number of 2-hour trainings held, you could count or you could document a number of one-on-one trainings held. The medical trained is also an output, and then outreach. Parents and children receiving packets you can document as well. It's also important to look at how the activities can correlate with the outputs. We can measure those. And then the last component is outcomes. And in this example, for instance, outcomes can be medical providers demonstrate accurate oral health assessment, education, and prevention activities, the high-quality oral health assessment, education activities, as well as parents and children are knowledgeable about oral health and caring for children's teeth. Examples of an outcome is to reduce the incidence of caries or cavities at the tribal health center. And proceeding in other sites, I'm going to go through each different section a little bit more specifically in terms of resources, activities, outputs, and outcomes, just so we can reiterate some of the ways in achieving your program goal. So tips that we'd like to give about using a logic model is using a series of what we call if-then statements. Developing your logic model, it's a good question, something that you're doing, if, then what? So resources, there are resources needed to run your program. Resources can be utilized in your program. There are also activities. With the activities, if you have access to them, then you can accomplish your activities. If you can accomplish these activities, then you'll have delivered services you plan to do. And if you have delivered the services as planned, there will be benefits for clients, communities, this organization. So, this example is really, it's really good advice to be able to do is to use those if statements to help achieve each of those categories. So there are different components of a logic model. There are the inputs can be considered sources, human resources, partnerships, equipment, supplies. Those are all considered a part of inputs. Materials and community resources, those also can be a part of the inputs as well. Outputs are the activities. The activities could be products, services, and infrastructure. Are the results or the effects from those. So outputs are categorized in 3 different areas as short-term, mid-term, long-term. So what you want to do is use examples to your organizational goals. So what aim or intended impact? For example, to have access to health care for 100 Native people with limited transportation from the nation to a tribal clinic in 6 months. So that's the goal of an overall organizational goal that you may or want to do. It's going back to the SMART objectives. This is also incorporate some of those SMART objectives as well. The overall goal it's specific, achievable. It gives you a time frame. Measurable, but how many rides you might want to be able to give? You may be able to document that in terms of the measurable aspect. Another example is to improve oral health by reducing the incidence of cavities 100 Native children ages 5 to 10 years old over the course of 12 months to treat a tribal community health center. So again, that's the overall organizational goal. Uses a SMART objective in a way that will have impact. To the logic model components, original resources are dedicated to or consumed by the program. When you have your program goal, your organizational goal, what are some of the inputs to that resources? Some of the human resources, facilities, equipment and supplies, parts, and even technology. Not necessarily have to propose what those might be, but you can identify some of these examples as well. That's what things that you can think of. So think about the components. What are you doing in your program? Are you outreach? Are you doing training? Are you doing quotation? Are you doing development? Or in partnership development? So kind of some of these components on what your program is doing can help start you in development of those activities for your logic model. So here's an of activity, the second of the logic model. It's also important to be able to narrow down the components and expand details. So when we look at the examples that we had for each, they can develop and distribute flyers, community stakeholders, schools or parents, focus group, the target population, the press packet, identify media contact, press packets to media contact. So those are examples of outreach. That's an activity. Training activity. You can hire a curriculum development team, or you have the training curriculum yourself. You can recruit a training team, recruit participants, the training session as well. So these components that I explained of the logic model example. So resources here, again, we have some of them listed here in terms of staff and resources, the input, and we have activities. We just talked about the activities in terms of training and outreach. I want to really get specific. So, for example, in the training aspect for the activities, you wanted the curriculum for 2 didactic trainings for medical providers in oral health assessment. So that gives you the time frame and for whom you're doing the training for. An example, and being more specific, is what are you outreaching with? So with this example, they're making packets that they will distribute to the parents of the children when they visit the tribal health clinic. To outputs and outcomes. So outputs, the pro producing. So these numbers, these are the measurable ways in which you assess what your program is doing. So number of training workshops held and documented. Number of participants attend each workshop can be documented. Number of partnerships formed is also important to be able to do. The number of policy briefings conducted as well, and the number of press packets disseminated can be done as well. So these are just some examples of how to be able to document what your program is producing, and also being able to measure it as well. So the output, so an example of the logic model, so documenting the trainings, the number of 2-hour trainings that are being held, the number of one-on-one trainings to be held, and the number of providers being trained. Really specific on how you're getting the outcomes for that as well, or the outputs for that is important. For your activity, which is outreach, you're going to be doing the number of parents and children receiving the package. So you relate your outputs to your activities, which will be able to, assist on what your program is producing. So also in the evaluation. What difference is the program making? And this is more about outcomes. The outcomes are about change. What is your program doing to make effective change? Producing new knowledge? Is it increasing skills? Is it changing their values? Is it mind behavior or practice? Or does it change the conditions? So, for example, some of the outcomes can be medical providers demonstrate accurate oral health assessment and prevention activities, more achieve high-quality oral health assessment, education, and prevention activities. Parents and children are more knowledgeable about oral health and caring for children's teeth. Reduce incidence of caries, cavities in children at the tribal health clinic. So those are some examples of the outcomes. The chain in outcomes is also important. As I mentioned earlier, these outcomes can be short-term, usually achievable within 1 year. So there's a time frame for a short-term outcome. And for the direct result of activities and output, again, achieved in 1 year. So there is that time frame for short-term. Outcomes short-term outcomes to long-term outcomes. So they will be in the between, if you will, of a certain long-term on what you want to be able to do. A long-term outcome is a result of achievement of short and intermediate term outcomes and often take longer time to achieve. So that's longer than a year, up to 2 years, maybe even 3 years in terms of what you want to be able to achieve your program. So this is another visual example from our goals. From short-term outcomes, intermediate outcomes, and long-term outcomes. Examples being medical providers demonstrate accurate oral health assessment, education, and prevention activities as a term outcome. Parents are more knowledgeable about oral health and caring for children's teeth is an outcome. An immediate outcome, can more children receive high-quality oral health assessment and then prevention activities during well-child visits. And outcomes, reduce incidence of caries in children receiving care in the tribal health center. These are just examples of the short-term, interim, and term outcomes of your program. I want to provide you with some logic model resources. A lot of these resources help to different ways of utilizing logic models. We just gave you an overview of the process of logic models using examples, but there's also some really good resources to be able to look up online. The online course in developing logic models and evaluations plan, which is offered by the University of Wisconsin, extension and design for the beginner. There's a website there. The W. Kellogg Foundation Logic Model Development Guide is a great resource. It has clear and concise discussion of the use of logic models and PDF guide that you can use. Logic Model Tools is a comprehensive list provided by the CDC, so that is another great resource. Innovation Network Workstation, an online workstation, evaluation and planning tools designed specifically for nonprofit organizations. And a website to be able to access that workstation. And a good to be able to use is the community toolbox, which you can access there on the website that's provided. So presentation just gave you a basic framework understanding on logic models using the example they did, and giving different types of components to be able to use in your logic model for program planning, as well as possibly maybe resource funding, proposal writing. This is our contact at the Office of Minority Health Resource Center. If you'd like to contact me or any of my staff there, we have a number of resources that we offer, whether it's training, technical assistance, capacity building, for free. And we also have positive minority health information in the government. So if you're looking at resources or articles on specific topics related to minority health, we can also provide that for you. We also have an information services tool that can help with doing some searches for you, whether it's federal funding, whether it's news that you might be able to use, citations. You can also access us or request any of that information.
So much, Elton, and we hope that everybody enjoyed the presentation. We've received a couple of thank yous for taking the time to go over the logic model in depth, so thank you so much for doing that. We will now go into a Q&A portion of the webinar. a great time for you all to ask Elton some questions about how to use a logic model within your specific settings. You could perhaps even give an example of what your program is doing and ask Elton advice or specific questions about your program. If you have any experiences with the logic models and applying for grants, tell us how it went for you. Was it successful? What did you learn? What kinds of feedback did you get from the people you applied the grant for? We do have several ways we can have you speak up. You either use the audio connection to actually go on the phone and talk to us. We can do that by having you click on the raise hand icon. It's highlighted in blue on the screen as an example there. When you raise your hand, we will be able to identify you and unmute your line, so you would be able to talk directly to Elton. If you prefer to just type in your question or and summarize your experience in the chat feature, you can just use the chat button on the right-hand side and type that in there. If you have questions for Elton as well, you can use the Q&A feature, and we will field those questions for Elton. To start, we have a question from Gypsy One. She asks you, Elton, for the outcomes, do you list the outcomes we expect, or do you wait until after the project to list those outcomes?
You can outcomes that you expect, but utilizing the outputs, I think, is important. So being able to document measurable outcomes is important. And then after you document the outputs, then you can list those in your outcomes as well.
Great, thank you. Also, if any questions, feel free to type it into the chat box or Q&A, or raise your hand and we'll be able to unmute you. I have a question internally here. You mentioned convening a group of people to talk to them and then start to populate portions of the logic model. What do you think would be good to involve in that conversation? What kinds of stakeholders would you consider to be a good people in a room to try and build the logic model?
I think in terms of having individuals be a part of the process, you would need to identify what population, particularly your program may be outreaching to, or the activities that they're going to be outreaching to. Then identify those individuals and maybe bring them in for a focus group to ask more tailored questions around what you're proposing in your logic model. I think is important. Utilizing program staff, program management to kind of filter through all of those information for the inputs to your logic model is also something you can be able to do.
Okay. While we have questions to come, Elton, I do have another question for you. When would you recommend programs and organizations to think about creating a logic model? Does it then, halfway through, make sure something is going well and then you create a logic model, or is it at the very beginning, or when you're trying to evaluate something at the very end? Where does the logic model fall into place the best?
I think it varies. If you're developing a new program, a new project, you definitely want to do that at the beginning. So setting out your program goals and developing objectives on how you want to achieve that. For programs that already exist, it's kind of good to the logic model if you've already developed one and kind of reassess it. Some organizations do it annually, within their own program staff or with their board of directors, just to see if they're achieving what they have to be able to do.
And a couple of chat questions coming in. Is good time or way to make changes mid-program? This is a question from Patricia.
Question. if it's not a, proposal, it's a part of something that you are using. Okay, let me rephrase that. I'm sorry. You can make changes to your logic if it's an internal document that you're using for your program. If you're utilizing a logic model for funding, per se, you need to be able to see how that process work out with your funding agency. Sometimes when you're looking at your outputs and outcomes, that helps you with, you need to be able to make some of those changes. And like I mentioned, some organizations can revisit the logic models annually. So that could be
Great. Audio connection issues. The question I have here in front of Elton, when you're talking about evaluation of your program, in what way the logic model will help you accurately report the outcomes of your program or your project?
I think the section of logic model that is more specific evaluation is the output. When you're looking at developing your output, it's really important to be specific on what you're looking at. When you evaluation output, it will help you and outcomes is going to be able to see the short term, and there's going to be better short term outcome, and the ERE outcome, the long term outcome. And sometimes motivation helps to dictate different type of outcomes that you're proposing.
Great. It looks like we're having some audio difficulties. Sorry about that. If there are questions, please feel free to type in the chat box, and if we ask Elton to just maybe answer those offline, and we can make sure that we have those available after the webinar by a follow-up email. So feel free to continue to use the chat feature and Q&A portion, but we will wrap up. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, and especially to discuss with our executives and time sharing also the basics of how to use and set up the logic model, its benefits, and I believe this will serve you in future grant writing as well as planning for your specific program. Please note before you take off to complete the polling engines on the right-hand side of your screen, we will use these to evaluate the webinar and to create technical informers and ask the expert